Thank you, Liz. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm really excited to be part of PIT Business's 20-year anniversary celebrations. I think these webinars are a great way to reach all current and previous students and alumni, so thank you for having me for this exciting topic that's really near and dear to my heart. As Liz mentioned, I am currently a financial services operations executive advisor with CEB here in the Washington, D.C. area. A brief background about me: I am a BSBA graduate from 2005 from the College of Business Administration, and my majors were finance and marketing and a minor in Spanish. And in my extra time, I was also heavily involved with Alpha Kappa Psi, a professional business fraternity, and I also managed to do a few internships throughout the course of my time at CBA. Prior to CEB, I had several positions with FedEx in different parts of the world, and we'll get to that in a second, but this is just to provide a high-level overview of my background. So as I mentioned, today's topic is globalizing your education and career. I think it's something that's important. A lot of people are talking about it now. They have been for many years now, and I think CBA and the rest of the University of Pittsburgh have done a great job to give you the tools and the resources to do this if you are interested. I'm guessing those that have joined this webinar today are interested in the topic, either in globalizing your education and or your career. So what I thought I'll do today is spend a little bit of time telling you a little bit more about myself, more so in an international context, covering my work now, my previous work experiences at FedEx, as well as my time at the University of Pittsburgh. We'll talk a little bit about why international is important from a corporate and or a work perspective. And I wanted to spend a good chunk of time talking about the benefits of doing anything abroad, either studying or working, and also some drawbacks and pitfalls, because as we know, it's not always perfect out there. There are a lot of things to take into consideration, and I think it's important to shed some light on some of the drawbacks and pitfalls, one, from my own personal experiences, and two, just from other people's experiences that I've picked up along the way. And then lastly, we'll spend about 15 minutes taking any questions and answers that you might have for this session. So in a brief nutshell, during my time at CBA, I did manage to do a study abroad in my sophomore year in 2001. Back then, not trying to date myself here, but back then, we had a few opportunities to do study abroad. It was definitely a growing concept, and the College of Study Abroad was very helpful in helping me identify which programs will work well for me. I was studying Spanish in my freshman year, which I really enjoyed, so I definitely wanted to be in a Spanish-speaking country. I also had a deep attraction towards Europe, so putting those two together, Spain was kind of an obvious choice to do that. I managed to find an organization that provided study abroad classes in Madrid, Spain, one that the CBA would approve for getting the credits back to the CBA curriculum. And my time in Madrid, Spain was focused on taking language classes in the afternoon with optional lectures in culture and art during the evenings. And during that time, the program also provided us with weekend getaways to many cities in Spain, thereby getting a really robust experience in 3 months all throughout Spain. I also stayed with a local family there, which was organized by the study abroad company that I studied with, and that really helped me gain proficiency and fluency in the Spanish language. When I reached Spain, I only had 2 semesters of freshman year Spanish under my belt, which was basically a few conjugation rules and a little bit of vocabulary. I was struggling during my first 2 weeks, but staying with this family and meeting locals and talking to local friends, by the end of the 3 months in Spain, believe it or not, I was having extensive dialogues and debates in Spanish with my host family about religion, politics, vegetarianism, all kinds of topics. So I'll come to it in a little bit later, but language is definitely a huge, huge benefit of living and working abroad. The second experience that I had internationally during my university days is a really interesting and unique experience that I am extremely fortunate of getting, is an internship abroad in Mongolia. A lot of people stop at my resume when they see this only because they just want to know, how did I get that? What was it, and why, how did I make it happen? And it was actually an honors college program back then where they sent 6 students every summer to Mongolia to pursue whatever they were working on. So if you were in business, you could do an internship. If you were in the sciences, you could do a project exploring Mongolia. If you were in the language or the arts, you could pursue something along those lines. But the idea was that we had a robust program with Mongolia through the Honors College, and through that I was able to be a summer intern at a local bank called Delta Sun. And it was an interesting time to be there because the market had just moved to a capitalistic market model where people were actually allowed to buy land. Before that, the country was completely nomadic. Nobody quite owned land. So it was really interesting to work at this bank and help them put together a mortgage proposal on how they would launch this product in a country where people didn't know what land ownership meant or home ownership meant. There's a slight typo here. This was actually done in summer 2004. I was supposed to go in 2003 with the same program but doing a different internship, and that summer's program was canceled because of SARS, the epidemic that broke out in all of Asia, and so nobody went that year. So just to give you a flavor that in international, a lot of other things can happen that can derail your work, so it is better to be planned. And the last thing I wanted to mention is that from a financial funding perspective, I was fortunate enough to receive the James B. Tapple Scholarship, which is designed for students doing unpaid internships during their time at CBA. So that was, in a nutshell, my experience in Mongolia. And again, very fortunate and very thankful to have that, and definitely have great memories and professional experiences from my time in Mongolia. During University of Pittsburgh, I also did a co-op with FedEx Services. I believe they are still very active in recruiting on campus at CBA for their internal audit 6-month co-op. That was an incredibly beneficial way to see and learn a lot about different departments of FedEx, and upon graduation, I joined them full-time in the Pittsburgh office out in Robinson Township for about 2 years, during which I did operational audits throughout Canada and the US. I also managed to get a project to go to Dubai, which is when I met the local team there, and long story short, we networked, we stayed in touch, and when the position opened up, I very quickly got the opportunity to move there in an emerging market strategy role where Dubai would control all the growing emerging market strategy and projects from Dubai for all of the Middle East, Indian subcontinent, and Africa. So again, very fortunate to get something international early on in my career, but it definitely helps to pick an organization that has international operations such as FedEx if you do intend to get that level of mobility and opportunity at the international level. In FedEx in Dubai, I spent about 2 years there. This was right before the global recession started, so we started feeling a bit of that impact in our work where we started to slow down a bit. And simultaneously, we were opening an office in Brussels in the internal audit space, so I got the opportunity to come back to internal audit, but in the Brussels office, which was amazing only because I have always wanted to live and work in Europe, and that is extremely hard to do for those of you who know that Europe is very protective about people with non-EU citizenship working there. So again, very fortunate to do that. I spent about 5 years in Brussels and did internal audit and consulting assignments across Europe, Middle East, Africa, and India, and traveled quite a bit and saw a lot. After that, I took about a year off to travel, spend some time with family just because I'd been abroad for so long. Spent about 5 months traveling through Asia and Australia, and then when I got back to the US, I knew I wanted to live in the Washington, D.C. area, so I started exploring and networking. And actually, an alum from CBA put me in touch with CEB, and long story short, I am here now, which is CEB is a research-based advisory company, and just unpacking that statement a little bit, we do best practice research for over 90% of the Fortune 500 companies in different segments and sectors. And my segment works with the heads of operations at banks and insurance companies across North and Latin America. So I don't have a traditional Monday through Thursday consulting travel job, but I do visit Latin America often to deliver this best practice research and content in Spanish. And I have clients currently in Mexico, Panama, El Salvador, Colombia, and Venezuela. So this has also kind of continued that international flavor while allowing me to continue practicing Spanish while living in DC. So that in a nutshell is a bit of my professional background. And I wanted to end that piece just with a quick graphic here. Again, we all love apps. I maintain this kind of nerdy app on my app called BIN, where I log every country that I've been to. So this is a cumulative map showing 14 years of amazing travels, which I managed to get while living abroad and traveling to countries for work and leisure. Again, it's something, the one thing I will say here is you'll see a lot of countries on here that are traditionally not on people's spectrum to either work in or study in or even travel as a visitor. The one thing I will say is, I'm assuming you all are interested in international, so try to pick things that put you out of your comfort zone. Choose stuff that you ordinarily wouldn't choose. For example, don't necessarily study abroad in countries that speak English because you do that in your home country in the US. Try to go to countries that really put you out of your comfort zone. For example, back in FedEx in Belgium, my manager always had a list of countries that we needed to go to for work, and I was always raising my hands for the less popular countries that nobody else wanted to go to, simply because I knew I would never get that opportunity again. So with that, I have been to countries that I traditionally wouldn't be able to go to or didn't, go to, like, for example, Saudi Arabia or Estonia or Russia. These are countries that are sometimes hard to get to as individual tourists. So I would highly recommend, stepping out of that comfort zone and picking countries that you ideally wouldn't choose to make your international experience more robust. So why international? We hear this all the time. We see this in business literatures. People talk about it all the time. We go to recruiting events. We go to seminars. We go to job fairs. And this international element keeps popping up. And a lot of us want to do that. We want to get there. And some of the reasons that I've kind of picked up along the years is a lot of companies are global and international right now. So they want a talent and a workforce that is at least global or willing to go global. This kind of morphs into different requirements. They want people that can inculcate and include cultural and business norms into their work. We no longer want to do projects that are only siloed in one country, for example. And once you have a stronger understanding of cultural and business norms, it has been proven that you will be more effective in developing global solutions to universal problems as opposed to just having a more narrow mindset within the region that you work in. If you develop and lead a project overseas, you will demonstrate that you're able to bridge cultural differences to deliver desired results. This also translates into how you handle diversity and inclusion in the workplace, whether it be in your home country or in your foreign host country. Studying abroad will also strengthen your leadership, problem solving, and communication skills at an early level in college. These are the soft skills and capabilities that a lot of employers are looking for right now, because the idea is that technical skills can be taught, but this level of cultural adaptability, communication, problem solving, leadership, these are hard to teach. And if you can prove that you've had these early on, it makes it that much easier for an employer to choose you over somebody else with similar technical skills. And lastly, students who study abroad or work abroad or intern abroad are viewed as independent, self-reliant, adaptable, open-minded, and my last two favorites, patient and tolerant. Living and working abroad has definitely taught me a lot about patience and tolerance, because several times things are not in your control. Things are not as easy as they are in the US, and that has taught me how to be patient and tolerant, not only with day-to-day work, but even with the locals that you interact with, the government officials that you work with, the supermarkets, the grocery stores. It all teaches you a good amount of patience and tolerance, which is extremely handy in the workplace. So with that as a background, let's talk a little bit more about what are some of the benefits when somebody does go international. We talked a little bit about some of them, but I wanted to take some more time and talk a little bit more about some others. And I've put a few on the slide up here. And really, the biggest thing is you get a global network. And even now, more so with social media such as LinkedIn and Facebook, not only do you start a global network when you go abroad, but it is that much easier to maintain that relationship once you leave that country, for example. I still have friends and contacts that I talk to on a regular basis in Belgium, in Dubai, in Spain, in Mongolia, and it's just been that much easier to maintain that contact. So not only do you get a global network through your experiences and time abroad, but it's also that much easier now to maintain that global network, which you can leverage and tap into throughout the course of the future. Language proficiency, I already gave you one good example. It is definitely worthwhile going to that country and practicing the language. I know several of my friends, you know, they study Spanish or French in high school for 5 to 6 years, but they come out not being proficient at all. And I think the big difference there is you really need to be in an environment where you can practice that language, learn the nuances, get the accents right, build cultural proficiency to get fluency in that language, and that really happens only when you go abroad a lot or you live abroad in that country. I put financial perks on here. You'll also see it on the next slide where we talk about drawbacks, but I wanted to include it as a benefit because what I have found is a lot of times positions that are of international caliber tend to pay a little bit more because they are looking for specific skill sets such as a global mindset or willingness to travel. So they tend to be a little bit more rewarding on a financial level. A lot of times people have told me that they don't look at international job opportunities because the U.S. taxes income from worldwide sources, and that is true. We do have to report worldwide income in our income taxes here in the U.S., but a lot of people also don't know that the IRS also has a $95,000 exemption for income earned worldwide. So there are a lot of technicalities, a lot of tax nuances, and I won't go into that right now. That could be a different presentation by itself. But what I will say is, don't dismiss an opportunity based on what you think might be a problem. Definitely look at the pros and cons and evaluate them from a financial perspective. Also, when you pay taxes abroad on a local salary, for example, in Belgium or in any other country, you can further offset that through tax credits in your U.S. tax reporting, for example. So again, a lot of financial perks. I also wanted to talk about the 2 most common ways of going abroad for working. A lot of times, U.S.-based companies will send their employees abroad on what is called a U.S. expatriate package. What that simply means is that you are on a U.S. labor contract, you get paid in dollars, the company files your taxes for you, and you live abroad for a specific amount of time with a contractual obligation to come back to your home country after that period of time is over. That has some perks because sometimes if you don't like the country, you can come back immediately. But at other times, if you really like the country, you might not be able to stay because your company wants you to come back to the home country. The other type of position that is very common is where you take a local position. So you basically move to the local entity of that company or a bigger organization in that country. For example, in Belgium, I was part of the local FedEx legal entity. So I got paid in euros, I got my European holidays, I got my European medical coverage, and I could stay there as long as I wanted. And then after 5 years, I decided to leave. So again, consider the model of the position that you are interested in, evaluate the financial pros and cons, and you'll see that you'll see both sides of the financial aspect of it before you make a decision. I've also found that fast-tracking career path tends to be a benefit of going abroad. A lot of times, again, because of lack of qualified people in certain areas, it is that much easier to jump levels. Diagonal career progression or career pathing tends to happen more at the international level, and it definitely helps people escalate up the career ladder, especially within one organization if there is an element of international in there. New connections. Again, going back to the global network, once you move abroad, you meet a lot of new people, make a lot of new friends, both in the workplace, you join local organizations, you take part in clubs and cultural events. Social media has, again, made this a lot easier. There are expat groups for almost every city now. There are organizations such as Internations, A Small World, Couchsurfing. These are all groups that help you make friends and connections faster, and I think that's definitely a benefit because, let's face it, we all don't want to hang out with our work colleagues after 5 p.m., even if it's international. So it definitely helps to make new connections, and that benefits a lot because you get to experience life from their lens and their point of view. You get to attend local dinners, they invite you to their homes, you travel with them. Definitely a huge benefit of working and living abroad. Interesting travels. You saw my map earlier. Again, never been so much more thankful for companies to allow me to travel to places that I ordinarily wouldn't. During my time abroad, I've done some really, really cool things that were typically on my bucket list 40 years later. During my time in Brussels, I went to Africa. I climbed Mount Kilimanjaro. Just in Dubai, I took part in dragon boat racing. I represented Dubai and the United Arab Emirates in the World Championships in dragon boat racing in Malaysia. So, you know, a lot of benefits of going abroad and, you know, doing interesting travels and trying the interesting experiences that sometimes can be harder to do in your home country. The last one is not something that I have exposure to because I'm still single, but a lot of my colleagues and friends have said that going abroad with the entire family is tremendously valuable for both your spouse, your partner, and your kids, if you have kids, because they can get involved in other ways with the local community. Kids go to schools and learn new languages very quickly. They have a much broader sense of culture and adaptation much earlier on. So definitely on the family level, there are a lot of good benefits. And a lot of times companies who move you abroad will be supportive of your family as well. So a typical expat package will include benefits for your spouses, for your kids to go to school, you get a bigger house, and companies are aware of that because they want good talent to move places. So again, do not hesitate to consider international experiences just because you feel like you have a family to look after or you have to worry about them. Again, just consider it, talk about it. You'll be surprised what companies are willing to do to send you and your family abroad. I do see some questions pouring in, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to save that for the end of the Q&A session. But thank you for those that are already sending it. One request, if you can send it to the Q&A box and not to the chat window, that way we have all the questions in one central location. So thank you for that. So we talked a lot about the benefits. Let's talk a little bit about some of the drawbacks, because I think it is extremely important to discuss some of these drawbacks as well. So during my time, again, talking to a lot of people, personal experiences, I think it is important to know that sometimes connections with existing family and friends can be impacted as well. Something simple like time difference, ability to call home on a regular basis, emailing, just visiting, it can be that much harder to do once you're abroad. Of course, things have become much easier. We have WhatsApp, we have social media, we have Viber, we have phone calls, email. Those have made it a lot easier, but the fact of the matter is connections with family and friends do tend to get a little bit more impacted once you're abroad, and you just have to evaluate that and see where you are. If you have aging parents who need help, or if you have friends who are, or family that are in schools that you cannot take them out of, those are definitely factors, but once you're abroad, connections with family and friends can be a little bit difficult to maintain. There's a sense of feeling rootless and homeless, especially expats or people who go abroad on a very formal 2-year or 3-year cyclical rotation program. The Foreign Service tends to do that. Companies tend to send their employees on 2-year rotations to different countries to set up local operations. They all tend to feel that they might be a little bit rootless or homeless. There is no one place that they can call home anymore. After a while, it becomes really hard to answer questions like, where are you from, because you just don't know where you're from anymore. And while that can be exciting or exhilarating in some ways, in other ways it can also make you feel a little bit rootless and homeless. So the day you do decide to stop going international, the question is, where do you go back to, because everything tends to be international or local. So that's definitely one thing to keep in mind. It can also put a lot of pressure on your relationships. Moving to a new culture can be very unsettling. It can sometimes cause friction in your relationships if you move with your partner or your spouse. The problem becomes even more when one of you is busy at work, so you have a life and you have a sense of normalcy, but your spouse might be struggling to spend time during the day with local activities, with local groups. They might not be as extroverted as you are, so they tend to feel a little bit more lonely or bored at home, and I think that's something that needs to be discussed and talked about before you embark on this journey to go international. An interesting factoid, during my time in Brussels, there is a group dedicated for this exact purpose, and it's called STUDS. And it's called Spouses Trailing Under Duress Successfully. And while that sounds a little bit funny or a little bit, quirky, This group was actually created about 60 or 70 years ago when it was not very common for females to have positions internationally while their husbands were at home. So there was a little bit of a psychological impact for these men, and they started this group more as a support group, as a psychological group, which is now, of course, taken shape more of a social club. But the point is that while somebody is busy working in an international setting, we need to consider the other person staying at home or trying to get a job and what that means for their relationships. So it's important to realize this commitment and just discuss all the possible consequences. A lot of times, companies will choose to send one person first and then the spouse follows later. What does that mean in terms of staying in touch, in terms of your relationships? Again, just keep in mind what happens to your relationships when you do consider going abroad. The next one is really important, especially now because of all the financial regulations that are happening across the world. This is definitely one of the pitfalls that I had because I moved abroad so early on. It was very hard to be disciplined about saving up for retirement, whether it be 401k or Roth IRAs or any kind of savings. When you go abroad, there's this sense of magic, there's a sense of adventure, and you sometimes tend to forget that you also have to be slightly more financially responsible. And it's that much harder because you don't have automatic 401k withdrawals. 401k does not exist outside of the U.S. So you have to do make a proactive attempt to save after taxes when you get your paycheck, to make that proactive attempt to set some money aside for your retirement if that is something you plan to do, which is really harder to do once you're abroad. Of course, you will be enrolled in international pension plans. Your local companies might save for you, but again, once you come back to your home country, it's that much harder to manage that money. You know, you might not even see it until you're 65 or 67. It might not be there. So just be cognizant about your retirement planning and your finances and what that means when you go abroad. Healthcare, that's another interesting topic. A lot of times people are very particular or passionate about the healthcare that they receive. Here in the U.S., we are used to a specific system. We're used to a specific insurance plan. We are a little bit specific about which kind of doctors we see. And truthfully, internationally, you might not get that level of doctors or medical, assistance that you require. A lot of countries now do have private medical care. They could be expensive. They could be hard to find. A lot more countries, especially in Europe, are on a social health care program, so it might be months before you get an appointment with a local doctor. So again, evaluate what impact the international position that you're considering has in your health care. Does your current organization cover you fully and comprehensively? Do you need to buy additional insurance for you and your family? Again, going back to the financial aspect of moving abroad. But healthcare is definitely something that you will need to evaluate and consider before you move abroad, and especially if you have family, right? It's going to be that much more important to take into consideration the healthcare aspect. The next one, I kind of bucketed them together. They could easily be different topics, with religion, sexual orientation, lifestyle. When you travel abroad for a week or two for holidays, that's very easy to ignore. You might skip your religious services for a week. You might try to be somebody else that you truly aren't. Your lifestyle could be very different, but that's okay because you're only there for 1 or 2 weeks. But when you live abroad, even for 3 months, 4 months, these things start to catch up. It is very hard to be somebody who you're not, and the country that you're living and working in needs to be accepting of who you are. This is definitely my experience while living and working in Dubai, and which is one of the reasons why I chose to leave Dubai, was because I knew going forward they would not be accepting of my sexual orientation, and that's why Belgium was that much more of an attractive option, and it is something that needs to be considered both for you and your spouse or your partner before you make that big step internationally. The last one, again, like I mentioned earlier, I put cost on here, specifically on the drawback section as well. It's in the benefits side, but some of the drawbacks of cost is, again, if you don't quite know what you're getting in terms of compensation, it might be more expensive than you bargained for. A lot of expat cities, especially the big hubs such as Singapore, Hong Kong, Bombay, Tokyo, Moscow, the big hubs of jobs where the jobs typically are, they tend to be very expensive cities. A lot of times employers may or may not cover things such as rent, but Here in the U.S., except for New York and San Francisco, rents are pretty nominal in most parts of the country. But when you go abroad, especially with a family, you're looking at $5,000 to $7,000 a month just for rent. And if that's not covered, you're looking at really struggling financially. And so that needs to be discussed early on, or at least researched. Do you know what you're getting into for a comfortable lifestyle abroad? Other costs, again, like I mentioned, healthcare, just simple things such as groceries. If you're used to certain types of groceries or supplies, you might not get them in the home country. You might need to go to specialty stores. If your kids wear certain brands of clothing, you might have to get them shipped. Again, look at your lifestyle from end to end and take a look at all the costs and see what that means once you go abroad. There are several resources out there that helps you analyze cost of living. There are even more websites that show you what an average shopping list looks like in different countries compared to our home countries in the U.S. And that will really give you a good indicator of what you're looking at month to month and how do you stack that up against your compensation package that your company is giving you, for example. I know I keep talking about these examples from a work perspective, but even study abroad, you're there for 3 to 4 months. Be very careful of costs. Try not to rack up credit card debt. I know a lot of my friends, when they did study abroad or semester at sea, it was very easy to put all of those costs on a credit card, and it really caught up with them throughout the years of college because they carry such a large balance on their credit card. So again, be very cognizant of costs. Look at scholarship opportunities, look at funding opportunities, look at working abroad while you're studying abroad as well. There are many creative ways that you can manage some of those costs while living abroad. So this list is not, extensive. There could be many others. I just wanted to include these as the top 6 or 7 that came to my mind. In the end, you will need to make up your mind if the positives outweigh the negatives. For myself, it has been a really rewarding experience, and I can definitely recommend it. But you will need to measure and weigh the pros and cons for every opportunity that you get to make sure that it is right for you and for your family and your spouse and your partners before you take that big step forward. So a lot of people have asked me, so what are some of your tips and recommendations and advice on, starting this journey? What do I need to do to prepare myself to go abroad? What are some of the tools and tips and techniques that you recommend to make one's profile more global or more international? So let's take a little bit of time talking about tips and recommendations that I think are definitely must-dos as you are in university and planning your international career. So simply put, just dive into all things international, and that can come in a variety of different ways. First things first, get a passport. I was surprised as to how many of my friends in university didn't have a passport, and while it is easy to get one, it is that much easier to have one because opportunities can knock on your door at any point. And you don't want to waste 10 weeks or 7 weeks getting a passport because there's a lot of documentation that goes into getting a passport. You might need to run home and get a few documents. So just get a passport and keep it ready. You never know when an opportunity knocks on the door. While you're at university or even in the early stages of your career, make international friends. Join international organizations that are either on campus or in your city. I mentioned a few earlier. There's Couchsurfing that has international groups for language exchange, for drinks, for happy hours. Internations has a lot of chapters across the U.S. It is a expat-based organization where you can attend local events and meet local members, network with them, practice languages, do cooking sessions together. There's a lot of ways that you can grow that international network just while sitting at home or near a campus. Take international classes or take internationally oriented classes. I know a lot of our requirements within CBA have an international component to it. So for example, for my literature requirement, I took a class on immigrant literature because I wanted to understand what international immigrants face when they arrive in the U.S., for example. I took the international marketing class as one of my electives. So wherever possible, without spending more money on credits, try to take classes that are a little bit more internationally oriented. Even in a normal class, try to do a paper that has an international topic on it. Try to speak to a professor who has international experience and use that for your paper. Those are just some of the ways that you can make your current academic workload a little bit more international. Consider taking, and I'm not sure if this is still being offered, but you could do an internship abroad and get marketing or finance credits for that. The internship that I talked to you guys about earlier in Mongolia qualified as a 3-credit finance internship course for me, which Life was like my professor and sponsor for, and I was able to get academic credits for an international experience. So definitely look at that as an option as you build up your credits and your transcripts. The next one, study, volunteer, intern, fellowships. These can all be done abroad to get more experience at the international level early on. A lot of them can be very cost effective if you plan it right. You can study abroad for either the same cost or even lower than your annual semester tuition at Pitt. You can volunteer abroad during spring break or during the summer. Tends to be a cheaper option than spending money on campus. Intern abroad. Now, let me spend a little bit more time talking about this because I know a lot of students, they say, oh, we don't have internship opportunities. They haven't been posted. We don't see any internationally. And internships really can take form in various different ways, right? If you know somebody abroad who has an office, ask them, hey, can I come and work with you unpaid for 2 weeks or 2 months? Can I get some hands-on experience in your office doing odd jobs? A lot of different experiences can morph into what we call a more formal internship, and that can teach you some really good skills while living and working abroad as well. And this, of course, doesn't apply just to international. You can do the same in the U.S. as well. A lot of my jobs and internships that started off as temp roles quickly morphed into internships because I took on more responsibilities and they made it more formal, and hence I was able to use that experience to get the next internship. Because as we all know, the first internship requires previous internship experience, right? So it's really important to kind of get that experience early on in different formats so that you can then get that great international internship you've been waiting for. There are a lot of fellowships out there. There are websites that list them, especially for students for most countries. I know the Honors College maintains a list of them as well. So that's definitely something that you can pursue and consider either for your gap year after graduation or even during your senior or sophomore year. Take a look at them because a lot of them have age limits so that after the age of 25 or 30, you're not even qualified for them. So that's a great way to get international experience, fully funded and paid for early on in your career. Leverage your network. Like I mentioned before, if you know people abroad, talk to them, call them, ask them to see, I'm sure they're always inviting you to come and visit for 2 or 3 weeks. So instead of just traveling around and visiting touristy attractions, spend some time in their office, get to know what the work culture looks like. You'll be amazed as to how much you can learn just by visiting somebody's office. What is the culture there? Is everybody locked up in offices? Do they have a open cube environment? Are people friendly towards the other gender? Just cultural nuances that you cannot read or, listen to, but you can see when you're there really, really will help you understand the world of international. LinkedIn and, Facebook, those help as well. So definitely, the join groups that are for international careers on LinkedIn, keep a pulse on job postings, just get a feel of what's out there, start reading reading blogs that focus on international, subscribe to The Economist magazine, because a lot of times when you have these discussions on interviews or even career networking events, they don't want to just know what questions you have about the international job. They want to know, do you have an international mindset? And a lot of this can be done sitting on campus as well. So read The Economist, know what's happening in the world. Do, general knowledge trivia quizzes online. It's just, a wide variety of different ways that you can make yourself a little bit more international, a little bit more robust while you're waiting for that first experience to happen. The next one might be a little bit harder to do, but I know we all have summer breaks, we all have spring breaks, so travel for extended periods. If you can and your finances allow it, or your parents can help you with that, or they have frequent flyer miles lying around, try to do a trip abroad, and by that I mean not just visit 10 cities in 10 days or over a month. It's very easy to do a checklist approach to travel, but you will be amazed as to how much you learn from being in one place for extended periods, knowing the culture, talking to the people, walk into a non-touristy bar and hit up conversation with the person sitting next to you, attend local cultural events, attend local organizations. And again, a lot of these are much more possible to find thanks to websites such as, Facebook, LinkedIn, Internations. These all have events posted and that you can participate for pretty much free, and you can learn a lot about your time there and the place that you're visiting. And again, back home, participating in foreign association events. This could be, international clubs on campus, the Asian Students Association, the Latin American Student Association. Carnegie Mellon has a lot of chapters of international students. See what events they're up to. A lot of those events are open to non-students as well. So, just email them, say I'm interested in coming to your event. Can I participate? Can I help out? Can I volunteer? You'll be, again, amazed as to how much you learn about different cultures just by the people that are from those cultures in your city or even in your own neighborhood that is open. So definitely, it's not about just signing up for job postings or talking to a recruiter, but it's also about making yourself more international overall as and when you get ready for that first study abroad or that first internship or even that first international job posting. So those are just some of my tips, tricks, and recommendations. I'll turn it back to Liz, who will walk you through some other logistical items. But I do see some questions trickling in. So while Liz is covering the next few slides, I'll take a look at some of the questions, and we'll come back to this in about 2 minutes so I can answer some of these questions that are pouring in right now. Go ahead, Liz.
Thank you so much, Rajiv. You did a great job at really bringing this topic to life. It's true, we think about working abroad, but the reality is, of course, that we're living abroad. So as you said, there's a combination of the magic and the excitement of being in another country, but there's also the everyday realities of life that we need to think about as well. So, listeners, in a few moments, we'll get to your questions. If you have a question about any of the material presented, simply submit your question by way of the Q&A tab. If your presentation is full screen and you wish to submit questions, you'll need to exit the full screen view and return to the WebEx event window before you will see the Q&A tab on the right-hand side of the screen. Our next webinar, coming up next week, will feature Darren Jones. Darren is a graduate of Pitt Business, and he'll be addressing the issues of ethics and compliance programs, a strategic business driver for the global pharmaceutical industry. Pretty relevant topic. We were talking earlier today about what has been going on recently with Volkswagen, so Darren will have a lot to talk about with regard to ethics and compliance programs. If you wish to register for that, please visit www.cba.pitt.edu/20. In addition to Darren's webinar, we'll also be on October 7th looking at the role of the business school within the university and how that role has been changing over time. On October 9th, I wish Rajiv could be here for this, but I don't think he can. We have our Pitt Business Block Party. And for alumni, we also have an after party taking place. That's our kickoff to the big homecoming weekend. On October 14th, we'll be looking at standing out on the job without falling flat, something we all aspire to. And on October 21st, we'll be talking about startups, jumping into the startup world, an honest conversation. And please, if you're not already doing so, follow us. You can find us on Facebook, as well as Twitter and Instagram. And we hope that you will follow us and keep up on all that's going on in Pitt Business. So now we're going to get to your questions, and I will turn things back over to Rajiv.
Thanks, Liz. I'm super excited because I see a plethora of questions coming through both the chat window and the Q&A. So let me just take them one at a time. We have about 13 minutes here, so I think I should be able to get through all of them. But if not, like Liz said earlier, we'll be happy to follow up with you via email afterwards. So let's take the first one. And I'll just read them out so that everybody can hear them. What advice do you have for learning to adapt to norms and values of your new colleagues in an international setting? I think this is a really important question because a lot of times, and I've seen this happening firsthand, is that when you move abroad, especially with an American company, sometimes the local hires feel like they're working in a culture that is purely American. And there is a fine line of balance that needs to happen between embracing that local culture because you are working in their own country versus, them having a good understanding of your culture as well. So I would say simple things such as going for lunch with them. Typically, expats may get tempted to hang around with other Americans or other people from their own countries, but make an effort to meet the locals, for lunch. Go out with them for lunch or bring your food and share it with them. Ask about their recipes and their days. A lot of times, just simple conversation will help you adopt to norms and values of your colleagues, and you can take them into account when you plan the next business project. Be cognizant about their holiday schedules, be cognizant about their families and their what they believe is valuable. A lot of times we go with the mindset that it is okay to work 15 hours a day, but in Europe that's actually looked down upon. So planning a project so that you know that something valuable such as work-life balance is embraced and not that you're not pushing your home country values onto them. So again, there are multiple ways that you can do this, but in a nutshell, I would say keep an open mind, ask a lot of questions. Your first 5 questions might be stupid and embarrassing, but guess what? At least you've gotten those out of the way. And the next few, at least it will show them that you are making an effort to learn the local culture, learn the local values, and that will help you adopt. Because guess what? Just how you have the same questions for them, they probably have the same questions for you too. They do realize that they are working in an international setting in their home country. So it does work both ways. So don't feel like you have to carry the weight of that adoption, but definitely make an effort to do so. The next question that we have about my favorite country, I'm thinking about studying abroad in Spain. Is there a particular city that that you would recommend the most to study abroad? Simply put, I think Madrid and Barcelona tend to have a lot more programs just because they are more international and they have more universities. But University of Salamanca and University of Toledo both tend to be really, really fine academic institutions, especially for local students. So if you want a mid-sized, smaller city feel to it, then I would definitely recommend Salamanca and Toledo as well. But both Barcelona and Madrid tend to have a lot more programs. So if you are trying to get certain types of courses under your belt, those two might be a better bet for Spain. The next question, for how long would you recommend studying abroad? Would it be better to study abroad for a whole semester or a school year as opposed to just a month or two over the summer? That's a great question, and I think when I did it, I kind of thought a semester would be good. That was my first kind of big venture abroad, and I was trying to cover my risks and my benefits. So I figured, okay, a semester is a decent amount of time. It was a 3.5-month program, so shorter than a traditional semester at Pitt, but it gave me a good flavor. Clearly, my Spanish improved a lot. So I think a semester is a good amount. Summers are a great way to do study abroad if you don't have any other plans back home. I know sometimes summer classes can be more expensive. Housing is limited on campus in the summer, so if going back home or spending time with your family is not an option for the summer, then I would recommend summers. But summer is a great time to either do like a summer internship here or, a summer internship abroad. But if just purely studying abroad, I think a semester is good. Let's see here. Wow, that's a lot of questions. Okay, so the question is, say you want to launch a career that is global, but don't think you'll be hired originally in another country. How do you make that transition? Again, fantastic question. I have often dreamt of applying to jobs directly internationally with a new company. And unless you're working with a recruiter or a headhunter who can make that case for you, it's going to be very hard for them to make a case internally that they're bringing somebody over on an expat assignment or an international assignment, paying for all those relocation costs when they're not sure about you as a candidate. So for that, I would say two things. One, try to get a job with that company locally, and that's exactly what I did with FedEx, and that really helped make that case internally. A lot of my current employees at CEB are also going international through CEB. So that's definitely the easiest way to do it. They know you internally. They have performance reviews of you. They can see your performance. They can talk to you informally and formally. going within the organization is the easiest way to go. If that is not an option, what I would recommend is, again, what I did is going and spending a couple of months in that country. So at least now you're in that country, you can meet the person face-to-face, you can be more proactive and say, hey, look, I'm in town, you know, I'm excited about this position, I haven't applied for it formally, but I would like to come in and talk to you about it. A lot of times people are open to that idea because it is a low-risk venture for them as well. And if nothing else, at least you build your network, you stay in touch with them on LinkedIn, and if something else pops up, then you already have that contact. So I would say definitely start with your local organization. It is the easiest, unless you have a specific skill or a language or a technical ability that the recruiter is looking for. It is much, much harder to make that transition directly from the home country to the new country with a new organization. The next question is, what experiences did you have with FIT alumni in your international business career? What role can an alumni network play, and how should you get involved? That's a fantastic question. Going back to my earlier point about leveraging your network, I think the alumni network is a lot more robust now than it was when I was just about graduating or in college. So you all have the tools in place, these types of webinars, these types of events that CBA and FIT businesses organizing. Great way to connect, even while you're still in university. And I think the role that an alumni network can play is absolutely very important, and things like LinkedIn has made it a lot easier. Just a case in point, my current role with CEB is what I got through an alum that I didn't even know, but when I got back to the US, or while I was still abroad, I was able to network on LinkedIn and connect with this person, and he referred me internally at CEB, and I got the role through that. So it works both ways. Once you're abroad, you can tap into the network locally in the U.S. While you're still in college or in the U.S., you can leverage that network abroad. And again, LinkedIn helps. I think we have an alumni database that is pretty good. You can leverage into that. And just ask questions. So now you have my email on LinkedIn, so get connected. And that way, in the future, when you have a question, you can email me and say, hey, I'm looking for something along these lines in this country. Do you have any ideas, or do you know anybody? It's a lot of effort on your part, but it does pay dividends very quickly. So definitely tap into your alumni network. And I am in touch with them now because I am making an effort to stay in touch with the alumni, but it is definitely of high value to do so. Oh, what are some of the most memorable experiences you had while studying abroad, especially in a place like Mongolia? I would say definitely getting out into the countryside and seeing things that I wouldn't have traditionally seen. This program was designed in a really nice way that we got to visit Russia and China as well, because both the countries had an impact on Mongolia and its history and culture. So the way the trip was organized is that we actually took the 5-day Trans-Siberian train from Moscow to Mongolia, and just that train ride taught me a lot about Russia, its culture, its people. You're talking to people in the cafe car. Definitely one of my most memorable experiences tied to the Mongolia experience. Studying abroad in Spain, gosh, that was 14 years ago, but lots of good memories. But some of my favorite memories have just been the ability to just converse and think in Spanish with the locals. That is something that still continues to stand out in my mind, because it is amazing how much more fun and how much more enjoyable those conversations are when you're not constantly stumbling with words and mentally picturing dictionaries in your mind. So again, very intangible experiences, but very memorable ones both in Spain and Mongolia. We covered that. You said earlier that patience and tolerance were important qualities. How does one cultivate them? Very good question again. I would say, again, a little bit harder because those things cannot be taught, but I think you can easily cultivate them by some of the things that I mentioned earlier. So even while you're on campus, muster the courage to go to a cultural organization that you have never heard of or never been to that country of, and attend an event of theirs. See what they're doing, see how they've done, see what kind of food they're eating, take part in conversation. And again, like I said, you will ask stupid questions in your first few times, but that's how you're going to learn. And it's easier to do that on campus than once you move abroad and do it in your new country when you're working or studying abroad. So both patience and tolerance kind of tied in with each other. You can do a lot of diversity training. You can do a lot of soft skills training on these topics. but I think invariably it is really important to kind of get out there and start mingling to build that level of patience and tolerance. I think we have one more question here. No, I think those are all our questions. I covered the chat box and the Q&A portal. So I believe those were the end of our questions.
Yes, Rajiv, I think it is. Thank you so very much. I really appreciate you taking the time and your generosity. I appreciate you sharing your email address as well as your LinkedIn information.
Sure.
Listeners, we're going to wrap up. On behalf of the University of Pittsburgh, I would like to thank everyone for your attendance and participation today. I hope you join us again for a future webinar. Thank you.